Paul Mashatile, whose wife has passed not long after he had to bury his mother. On to other news. So it is back to school this week for more South African learners, and an uncertain time ahead of provinces like Gauteng, where COVID-19 cases are believed to be rising alarmingly, although there has been no data released for the province for the past 2 days. Cabinet will be meeting tomorrow to discuss a number of issues. The issue of a hard lockdown has been raised. The president saying in a statement a few days ago that that is not on the cards. Some other tools are being considered. Let's talk to our political reporter Samkele Maseko about the meeting of the cabinet and also the National Coronavirus Command Council. Samkele, what can you tell us at this point?
At this point in time, so it's not very clear what's going to happen in that all-important cabinet meeting that's taking place tomorrow, which is usually chaired and always chaired by President Cyril, of course, the Deputy President David Titi Mabuza. But what is pretty clear, speaking from the Minister of Mineral Resources and the National Chairperson of the governing party, Gwede Mantashe, during the week, is that he is saying that a staggered approach to the lockdown must be implemented as opposed to a hard lockdown that has been there before at level 5, saying that if the government were to go and take that route, that will have severe consequences on the economy. As we remember that the economy, as at this point in time, is very much constrained. There are a number of job losses, particularly not only within the private sector, but also within the government sphere. A number of state-owned enterprises or state-owned companies, SOCs like the SABC, SAA, are retrenching, and SA Express. So the government is looking at various ways of implementing a more moderate and eased lockdown, but in specific areas which are hotspots of this particular pandemic of COVID-19, like the Western Cape, in particular the city of Cape Town. You go to the various metro municipalities like the metro of eThekwini, there would be more stringent and more enforcements of this particular lockdown, but also brings about the question the deployment of the South African National Defence Force has long ended. How will the government look at ways of enforcing the various regulations you need in order to force people in areas that will be implementing a hard lockdown? And should the government take that route? Remember, in the past, the Premier of KwaZulu-Natal, Sihle Zikalala, did say that areas like eThekwini Metro Municipality would see a lot of SANDF being deployed into the city in order to force a more stringent and more regulated lockdown to stop the spreading of this particular pandemic.
Samkele, what is your understanding of a staggered approach? At some point, there was the use of the term intermittent lockdown, and I mean, we are already under lockdown, but I imagine that meant intermittent stringent lockdown. But how would you apply that if you understand the staggered approach? Would you target certain industries? Would you target operational hours while not disturbing the economy?
You'd remember there was once a proposal by the Tripartite Alliance, in particular the South African Communist Party, of extending and having a more eased approach to the African working hours, that as opposed to the regular 8 to 5 form of employment, we have an eased lockdown where some start earlier on in the morning and knock off earlier on, and some start later on in the day and particularly end off their working hours late into the evening. So that may be one of the approaches that may be taken, particularly for the financial sector in the country. Those are some of the proposals that were there about a year ago within the Tripartite Alliance. But then you've got interesting comments, particularly from the Minister of Mineral Resources, when you look at this particular issue of how this particular pandemic of COVID-19 is slowly and gradually now infecting those who are working particularly within the belly of the earth in the mining sector of the country. He is saying that predominantly those people who are infected with this particular pandemic are coming from a rural province like the Eastern Cape, where this particular pandemic is spreading like wildfire, and with the failures of governance in that province that has been happening in the past 23, 24 years of democracy. Those are the areas that some of the mines or people who are going into the mining area that they are finding having this particular pandemic. But it's more complex in this way that many of the areas that are largely affected by this particular pandemic of COVID-19 are the economic centers or the economic hubs of the country. Your cities like the city of Gold, Johannesburg, city of Tshwane, you go to Ekurhuleni, you go to other areas like the metro municipality of eThekwini, you go to the city of Cape Town, Buffalo City, Nelson Mandela Bay. These are the economic nubs of the country, and if you were to implement a more stringent or a hard lockdown within these areas, that would affect productivity within the economic landscape of the country, which would effectively deal with the economy and further batter it as it's already battered. For you look at a city like or province like Gauteng, which is highly dense, which is the vast majority of South Africans between KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng are situated in the Western Cape. You've got an issue of that those are where the industries are effectively are when it comes to the corporate governance of the various entities. Some of the mines, you would find them in Gauteng, and they would also be negatively affected by this. You look at the movement that is currently there in Gauteng now. Just last week, the Premier of Gauteng, David Makhura, was saying that if no hard lockdown is enforced again in the country, or particularly for Gauteng, Gauteng is running the risk of having the highest numbers in terms of active cases of COVID-19. Yet, this is the economic hub of the country. It places the government, and particularly the President and the Minister of Finance, Tito Mboweni, who's looking to stimulate the economy when it comes to build infrastructure projects. It places them in a conundrum that they may have to enforce a hard lockdown in these economic hubs of the country, which will be detrimental to the economy. So the President, the Command Council, and the various cabinet ministers have a balancing act to do. It's either they save the economy or they save people's lives, which will be dying if they were particularly have some sort of chronic illness and they're infected by this particular pandemic. So there's a balancing act that they have to do. They have to find middle ground.
Thank you so much, Samkele Maseko, our reporter, speaking about the cabinet meeting that is expected to take place tomorrow.